Number 6. The Montrealer. This was a train, even though it started in 1972 for Amtrak, could have been a holdover from the Boston and Maine's own Montrealer, which ran from Montreal, Quebec to Washington, D.C. Amtrak's reincarnation was an overnight train between Washington and the train's namesake city. The train ran the Northeast Corridor from Washington, D.C. to New Haven, Connecticut before turning north to Springfield, Massachusetts, through Vermont to St. Albans, and then across into Canada to Montreal. It would be known as a party train, with the large number of skiers who often rode the train and stay up late into the night, possibly not sleep at all. One problem that faced the train, like other routes in this list, was deteriorating track conditions. Specifically for this train was between Brattleboro and Windsor, Vermont, which made Amtrak cancel the train on April 6, 1987, replaced by bus service north of Springfield to Montreal. In fact, it would become a case that went to the Supreme Court in what was known as the National Railroad Passenger Corporation versus the Boston and Maine Corporation. The court would rule that Amtrak could condemn a railroad's trackage and convey it to another railroad to continue passenger train service. The train was brought back on July 19, 1989, with Amtrak gaining control of the segment of track between Brattleboro and Windsor while improvements were made. Once they were complete, the trackage was sold back to B&M's successor Central Vermont. Also during this time, the routing off the Northeast Corridor was changed to New London, Connecticut, which ran through to Palmer, Massachusetts, and adding a stop at Amherst, Massachusetts. A stop in Willimantic, Connecticut came in 1992. This train, though, was replaced in 1995 by the day-running Vermonter, which ran only as far north as St. Albans. The train also split from the Northeast Corridor at New Haven again, but would run east at Springfield to Palmer, where it performed a reverse move to reach Amherst. This practice would continue until the end of 2014, when it was rerouted to the Montreal's old route north of Springfield through Northampton, Massachusetts. But the route from Brattleboro to New London might have a new future with passenger service. A proposed Central Corridor rail line would connect the two towns over most of the Montrealer's rerouted line and would include stops at Amherst and Willimantic. At the time of this production, there has been no update on its status. Number 5. The Desert Wind. Now we're getting into more recent western routes. This is one train that really had my attention when I first heard about it, especially a long-distance train that had only about 5 cars. The train's existence came about in 1979 during the onslaught of money-losing routes taking place, and Nevada Senator Howard Cannon was pushing Amtrak to have a train serve Las Vegas. The first proposed attempt was to reroute the Southwest Limited, which was the existing Chicago-Los Angeles train and would be predecessor to the Southwest Chief. However, the Southwest Limited remained, and Amtrak created the Ogden, Utah, via Las Vegas and over Cajon Pass to Los Angeles, Desert Wind, on October 28, 1979. The train ran overnight and was a connection to, at the time, the San Francisco Zephyr at Ogden. Starting the next year, the service began having a coach run through on the San Francisco Zephyr to Chicago. 2 years later came a through sleeper. In 1983, the eastern terminus became Salt Lake City due to the San Francisco Zephyr becoming the California Zephyr and running on Denver and Rio Grande trackage to Denver. Not long after the rerouting of the Zephyr, the Desert Wind became part of the Zephyr from Chicago to Salt Lake City, along with the Pioneer Zephyr that ran to Seattle. However, like the cuts made the same year the train was inaugurated, cuts in 1997 would befall the Desert Wind, which ran for the final time on May 12, 1997, leaving no train service to Las Vegas. But that has been a hot topic. Many tries have been made to make rail service operational again between Los Angeles and Las Vegas, using Talgo equipment and the Las Vegas Railway Express X train, and as of recently, high-speed rail, with trains being built in China. But at the time of this production, nothing has been cemented yet. But one can envision passenger rail returning to Las Vegas in the near future. Number 4. The San Diegan. Honestly, this is one name that couldn't be excluded from this list. Just the name San Diegan brings back many to when it was operated by the Santa Fe Railway, starting in 1938. But when Amtrak took control in 1971, it only had 2 to 3 trains daily between Los Angeles and San Diego. But 5 years later, it started to expand the service. In 1988, an extension to Santa Barbara was implemented for the service, then to San Luis Obispo in 1995. The trains by the early 90s were running with Amfleet coaches and ex-Metroliner cab control cars that were often powered by the F40PH locomotives or the GE-8 32BWHs, which were delivered to Amtrak in 1991. Service also saw the IC3 Flexliner train set being used on the route. By the late 1990s, it felt that the route name didn't reflect the recent expansions and additional service to the north along the coast. On June 1st, 2000, Amtrak did away with the San Diego name, replacing it with Pacific Surfliner, ending an era that started back in the Franklin D. Roosevelt administration. Number 3. The Pioneer. When the Union Pacific Railroad was still operating passenger trains, one of their prestigious streamliners was the City of Portland that ran between Chicago, Illinois and Portland, Oregon, over the famed Overland Route. But Amtrak did not retain the train or its sister, the Portland Rose, that ran from Portland to Kansas City during its interception, which meant if you wanted to travel from Denver to the Pacific Northwest by train, you'd have to go to Northern California or to Chicago. Amtrak sought to fill this gap, and it started on June 7, 1977 with the inauguration of the Pioneer, an all-coach Amfleet train running between Salt Lake City and Seattle, and a sleeper being added in 1978. Superliners came 3 years later to the train. Like the Desert Wind, the Pioneer would exchange a through coach to Chicago on the San Francisco Zephyr at Ogden, Utah in 1981, and a through sleeper came a year later. That operation shifted to Salt Lake City when the Rio Grande gave up its passenger service and Amtrak shifted the San Francisco Zephyr to the Mop line and renamed it the California Zephyr, where the Pioneer also became a through train to Chicago. In June of 1991, the Pioneer started to split from the Zephyr in Denver and proceed over the Overland Route through Wyoming. Part of the reason was because of the California Zephyr, with both the Pioneer and Desert Wind in the consist, had a staggering 16 Superliner cars, and it would take at least 4 F40PH locomotives to cross the Rocky Mountains with the combined train. This early split helped to reduce the load. Furthermore, a faster running time across the Overland Route allowed for a better departure time from Seattle. The train, though, became a tri-weekly train in 1993. Then as 1997 came around, Amtrak announced that the Pioneer would end service on May 10, 1997, when a mandate that was congressionally funded that would keep it operating expired. The states affected by this had until March 15th to submit proposals for funding to keep the train going. Some proposals to keep the train running would be to make the train an all-coach train and carrying mail and express cars and rerouting the eastern portion of the train on all Union Pacific trackage through Iowa to Wyoming. Oregon then refused to provide loan guarantees because of the ex-Santa Fe high-level cars that were being used weren't acceptable. Then the final nail in the coffin came on April 10th when the UP told Amtrak's proposed routing for a mail and express train would require $56 million in capital investments. Then, as promised, on May 10th, the Pioneer ran one last time and was discontinued. Many attempts and proposals have come recently to bring back service from the Pacific Northwest to either Denver or Salt Lake City, but it doesn't seem too likely service will return anytime soon. Although, on certain occasions, the California Zephyr detours across the overland route between Denver and Salt Lake City when track work is being done over the former Rio Grande route. Number 2. The Broadway Limited Three Rivers. More of a tale of two trains with this spot on the list, mainly because of their differences operating between the two same cities of New York and Chicago. The Broadway Limited was the premier train of the Pennsylvania Railroad when it started on November 14, 1912, to compete with the New York Central's prestigious 20th Century Limited. After the PRR merged with the New York Central to form Penn Central, the Broadway Limited was only one of a few long-distance trains to survive into the merger. Then 3 years later, PC conveyed the Broadway to Amtrak in 1971, running on the original route over the old PRR line. But it found problems with deteriorated track work in the 1970s, mostly on the western portion of its route. It was also rerouted over former Baltimore and Ohio trackage in Indiana and Ohio in 1990 due to Penn Central's successor Conrail's desire to abandon part of the former Pittsburgh, Fort Wayne, and Chicago Railway, which meant ending service to Fort Wayne, Indiana, Lima, Ohio, and Crestline. Just like many trains of the 90s, financial problems were plaguing the train, as it was only earning about a quarter of its costs to run of $24 million. On September 10, 1995, the service was discontinued, and the route went into a new life as the Three Rivers, trains 46 and 47. Well, it didn't directly replace the Broadway Limited on the full route. Passengers would make the connection to the Washington-Chicago Capital Limited at Pittsburgh, and that stop also was to transfer mail cars off the Three Rivers. Through service started 5 months later in February of 1996, with 2 Amfleet cars and mail cars being coupled to the rear of the Capital Limited. This operation lasted until November 10, 1996, when the Three Rivers would be extended to Chicago as an independent train, and even gave the train back its original numbers from the Broadway Limited, 40 and 41. People joke that the Three Rivers was more a freight train, as Amtrak ran mostly mail and express baggage cars, material handling cars, and road railers, with about 4 to 5 passenger cars in between the bracket of mail cars. The train also didn't have a full dining car due to equipment shortages and to the unfavorable schedule the train had, which included a late 10:40 p.m. departure from Chicago for train 40. A sleeper was added in 1999, but was of a heritage sleeper. This was replaced when Viewliners became available to the Three Rivers in 2001. Later, a stripped-down type of dining service was offered for the train. This service is also run on the tri-weekly Cardinal. This train's fate would come in several stages, as Amtrak would lose out on the mail contract. Then the last run of the Three Rivers with a baggage car, sleeper, and full dining service took place on October 31st, 2004. Then the train disappeared from the timetable pages on March 6, 2005.